Okay, hello everybody. My name is Jennifer Core. I'm the Executive Director of the Tennessee Historical Society, and welcome to session one of our new series, Tennessee 101, The History of Tennessee Arts and Crafts. So we have 4 more webinars coming up as part of this series. We'll have 2 more in the fall and 2 in the winter. Our next one is going to be on artist Carol Clore. And then in November, we'll be talking about Tennessee chairmakers with a practicing chairmaker and also a historical view of chairmaking. In January, I'll be talking about Tennessee samplers along with my research partner, Janet Hassan. And in February, we'll have a chat with a curator about 100 years of Black crafts and arts in Tennessee. So tonight, we'll be talking about furniture, and our speaker is Candice Roland Candeto. She's the senior curator of fine and decorative arts at the Tennessee State Museum in Nashville. She holds an MA in American Material Culture from the Winterthur Program at the University of Delaware, where she focused on the furniture of the American South. She also has a BA in Historic Preservation and American Studies from the University of Mary Washington. A native Tennessean, Candice has worked at the James K. Polk Home and Museum in Columbia, as well as several museums and sites in Virginia. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here and turn it over to Candice. And she is going to tell us about the new exhibit at the Tennessee State Museum.
All right. I don't know why that didn't start at the beginning there, but thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Nikki, for the invitation. I'm happy to be kicking off your wonderful lecture series with a topic that's really a passion project for me. So I'm excited today to share with you a little bit about the current temporary exhibition at the Tennessee State Museum, which is called Tennessee Furniture. And it features selections from the state's really wonderful furniture collection. So just a little bit of intro here. For anyone who has not been to the State Museum or maybe has only visited us when we were in the basement of the James K. Polk building under TPAC, I want to make sure that everyone is aware of the museum and how you can come visit us. So since October of 2018, we are in our beautiful new facility that you can see here, kind of right across from the Bicentennial Mall near the Capitol in downtown Nashville. We're right across from the Nashville Farmers Market, and we have a great free parking lot, which I know is a big hindrance for a lot of people when they're thinking about coming downtown. So we do have some great free parking. And the museum has free admission as well. So definitely consider stopping by, especially if you have not seen the new museum. And hopefully this will give you a little bit of introduction that will inspire you to come see Tennessee furniture. All right. So definitely looking forward to talking through some of the exhibit today, but of course we are historians and we love to have a little bit of background. So to get us started here, in the broader world of decorative arts, attention towards Tennessee arrived a little bit later to the scene. And it's really a handful of people who led the way in ensuring that Tennessee's early material culture was first preserved and then studied and documented. And in 1971, Ellen Beasley published what was really the first official scholarly work on the subject of Tennessee furniture. And that was with her article in a groundbreaking Tennessee-focused issue of the magazine Antiques. So then over a decade later, In 1988, the Tennessee State Museum Foundation, in partnership with the Tennessee Historical Society, published the first and what remains really the only comprehensive survey of this topic. And this was based off of several years of field work that had done some really great surveying and documentation in both public and private collections across the state, focusing on early furniture that date about 1850. So looking at mostly things before that date. And that's resulted in this book. Some of you who are familiar with the topic are maybe lucky enough to still have a copy, a highly valued copy of this masterpiece. It is The Art and Mystery of Tennessee Furniture, authored by Nathan Harsh and Dorita Coleman Williams, and edited by Tracy Parks. So that was 1988. And since that time, there have been some important journal articles and a few exhibitions that have shed new light on specifically kind of local or regional cabinet making schools or regional traditions within the topic of Tennessee furniture. And specifically in 2003, the Tennessee Historical Quarterly worked with the Tennessee State Museum to publish 30 works from the state's collection in the journal issue that you can see on the screen there. So, of course, today we don't have time to provide a full picture of all of the collectors, researchers, institutions, and individuals who have contributed to our understanding of Tennessee furniture. But for now, we can say that by and large, the institutional or scholarly focus on this subject really began just over 50 years ago. And it's been a generation since a larger scale cooperative effort to review the topic of Tennessee furniture was organized. So we're now, almost 40 years after The Art and Mystery of Tennessee Furniture was published, and the new exhibition at the State Museum is not seeking to provide a comprehensive look at the topic again, but we do hope that by reviewing our own collection and the State Museum's own role in preserving and interpreting Tennessee furniture, that we might spark renewed interest in this subject for a new generation. So for us at the museum, the Tennessee Furniture Exhibition really had two goals. And the first was an external goal. It is an invitation to our visitors, scholars, collectors, and all of you really to discover Tennessee furniture for the first or the 100th time. But the second goal is more internal and really kind of a self-reflective one. So an exhibition like this one, which features no loans, but is purely driven by the state's own collection, allowed us to evaluate the over 900 pieces of furniture that we steward, and allowed us to kind of determine some strengths, weaknesses, and areas where new stories were waiting to be told. So the exhibition is organized around 5 of the really countless different ways of learning from furniture, examining how furniture can be read as primary sources that are every bit as valuable for learning about the past as written records, and often with far greater depth and richness to the stories that they can tell. These major sections each ask a primary question. Who sat here considers why museums collect furniture. Made by Hands explores how learning about the ways that furniture is made can teach us about Tennessee history. On the Move considers what makes a piece of furniture Tennessee. Furniture in Action examines the roles that furniture plays in our homes, businesses, and communities. And a final section considers how we can appreciate furniture as art in some of the same ways that we might approach a work of sculpture, for instance. Above all, I hope that this presentation serves as an invitation to you all, like the exhibition itself does, that we would love for you all to join us in engaging with this topic and these objects as we continue to learn more from the state's remarkable collection. But let's dive into some of these exhibition's questions and these questions that we can bring to furniture, beginning with an example of the role that furniture plays in the home. I provided a little bit of background on how the decorative arts world at large was perhaps slow to turn its eyes southward and westward to Tennessee. But the reality is that there have always been folks who have stewarded and appreciated Tennessee furniture. And that's, I think, because there really is a lot to appreciate here. Starting off with this very recent acquisition, you can see on the screen here. This is a pie safe from Sullivan County. And I think it really illustrates some of the visual delights that are offered by the topic of Tennessee furniture, as well as the ways in which furniture can teach us about the lived experiences of past Tennesseans. This safe is attributed to John Wolfe of Sullivan County. He was born around 1810 in the Piney Flats area. And we now know that we have identified a number of safes that are attributed to Wolfe and his shop. You can see some examples on the screen here. Two of these are now in the State Museum's collection, including our newest example there at bottom left. Safes like this one were used at times to store food, where the punch tin doors provided ventilation and helped to prevent spoilage. But by the mid-19th century in Tennessee, they were actually most often found in dining rooms, where they'd come to serve as a sort of sideboard with storage for linens or other household items in the cupboard, and a work surface for food staging or service on the top. So this recently acquired safe by John Wolfe has a very important feature, and that is, of course, this evidence of potentially original or at least very early blue paint. So tins on safes in this period, we know were very often painted, but the reality is that that paint very rarely survives to the present, which makes this a very special example. Some evidence suggests that blue and green paints especially were thought in the 19th century to repel pests, which would of course aid the safe in its goals of preserving valuable food and textiles stored inside. And the kind of fun part of this story is that that might not actually be so off base. Green paint from this period especially often contained arsenic, which by the 1930s was intentionally used as a pesticide, although of course we would no longer use it near food. In addition to looking at how furniture was used, considering how, by whom, and where furniture was made can open important stories. So for the majority of our time this evening, I want to look closer at the idea of regionalism and how the theme of movement, as reflected in our furniture collection, pieces together a story of Tennessee. As with the John Wolfe pie safe, this next piece truly exemplifies the joys of Tennessee furniture. This piece may be familiar to some of you. This desk by John C. Bergner, which has been on display at the Tennessee State Museum prior to this exhibition as well. Here I'm grateful to Daniel Ackerman, whose research on Bergner, published in an article in the Mesda Journal, has provided an unusually full picture of a 19th century craftsperson's life. Born in Virginia, Bergner moved to Northeast Tennessee in 1810, operating his business from about 1818 into the 1850s in Tennessee and North Carolina. He created this desk in the State Museum's collection and on display now, early in his career. A handwritten label, which you can see here on an interior door, gives us valuable information about the maker, the desk's original owner, and the desk's most intriguing and surprising feature. You can see here the musical sort of notations, musical inspired illustrations that Bergner included on either side of the 1819 date, which is sort of a intriguing hint, because when you open the top drawer here, pulling it out to access those top interior drawers, This activates a quill, which is installed inside the top of the case. That quill strums a zither, which you can see here, producing an arpeggio. We know that Bergner also made dulcimers, so it makes sense that he had the technical skill and the musical knowledge to create a desk like this. But we don't know exactly why Bergner included this feature. That's, of course, always the question when we show this piece off that visitors have. It's possible that the musical feature acted as a sort of security feature. Of course, anytime someone attempted to access the inside contents of this desk, you would be audibly notifying everyone in the household that that was happening. But I also think that we have to leave room for the possibility that Bergner included this feature simply because he could. I think it's safe to assume that Bergner, the desk's first owners, and others who came into contact with this piece surely enjoyed showing it off as much as we continue to enjoy it at the museum today. But there is more to this remarkable desk than just its shock value or its artistic merits, although both alone would be worthy of our attention. Bergner is one of the best documented artisans of the American South, and a closer look at his surviving ledgers and account books remind us of an important truth, that cabinet making was very rarely, if ever, a solo pursuit. And masterworks like this desk were rarely, if ever, the product of just one master artisan. Bergner's journeymen, in many cases, moved on from East Tennessee. John Dawson, Bergner's earliest known journeyman, moves to Indiana and later Iowa after he left Bergner's shop. Another journeyman named Samuel Wyckoff moves to Arkansas. In doing so, journeymen and apprentices, like those who worked in Bergner's shop, carried Tennessee furniture construction methods and stylistic choices with them, spreading the influence of their regional schools as they went. We can see this theme of movement throughout the earliest period of Tennessee's history. And I think that clocks are a great example of this, as the specialized construction of clock works often meant that many Tennesseans' clocks had been made elsewhere, in areas that specialized in that subject. Several communities to the north supported numerous clockmakers in a single town. This tall case clock with 30-hour wooden works is on display in the exhibition and is a good example of this theme. The clockworks were made by a man named Wheeler Lewis of Warren, Ohio. Home to at least a dozen clockmakers operating around this time, the town of Warren was conveniently located along a tributary of the Ohio River. By 1825, around the time that our tall case clock was made, Warren was at the peak of its clock production, having implemented mass production techniques with craftspeople working together in a network and specializing each in just one step of the clockmaking process to maximize their efficiency. Ohio-made clockworks were then transported along the Ohio and Cumberland rivers into Nashville, where they reached Tennessee customers. Local cabinet makers then constructed cases to house these clocks, as in our example at the museum, which stylistically and in its use of materials suggests that it was made in Davidson County. This example is an important reminder that Tennessee furniture can take us beyond the borders of the state. One of Tennessee's greatest natural advantages, its system of rivers, was a key player in facilitating the trade that helped furnish even the earliest of Tennessee homes. So through the process of creating this exhibition, we continue to learn more about our collection. Now, I mentioned at the beginning how this had been a really self-reflective and investigative process for the curatorial team at the museum. And ongoing research and interpretation has actually reattributed one of these John Earhart Rose pieces in our collection to Pennsylvania. But before you think that this is a disappointment for a Tennessee collection, this piece remains invaluable for telling the Tennessee story by again highlighting this critical movement theme. The maker of both this bureau and this secretary desk that you see here was a very skilled cabinet maker named John Earhart Rose. Rose was born in Pennsylvania in 1767, where he apprenticed as a cabinet maker. And like so many others, Rose moved from Pennsylvania in the early 1800s into Southwest Virginia by way of the Shenandoah Valley, along what has become known as the Great Wagon Road. As wonderful research by former furniture curator at the State Museum, Mike Bell, Sumter Pretty, and Betsy White has documented, Rose practiced in Virginia for a time before continuing along the Wagon Road and settling in East Tennessee in Knox County. There, by 1824, Rose joined the shop of a man named John Lonis. And here you can see a piece from our collection, which is attributed to Lonis's shop. It's that chest of drawers on the left there. While in the Knoxville area, Rose produced the first of his remarkable signed pieces of case furniture held in the State Museum collection. This bureau, which uses some of the same proportions, techniques, and stylistic choices as the John Lonis shop example. These include veneered cherry posts and carved diagonal hatch marks, which you can see in the detail shot here. Rose signed this 1824 bureau, which is a really wonderful feature Rose liked to include for us, made by John E. Rose from Philadelphia, White's Settlement, September 10th, 1824. Perhaps Rose included this reference to Philadelphia, where he was trained, as an endorsement on his work. Others at the time certainly did, given that the city's reputation for excellence in cabinet making was well known. White's Settlement likely refers to an area to the northwest of Knoxville, today known as Powell Station, where Rose may have been living or working at the time. But now for our second piece, this secretary desk. There are notable similarities between the two pieces, most obviously, of course, the repeated use of this carved urn motif. This example is also signed by Rose with, oh, here's a detail of those urns, with an inscription reading John E. Rose from East Tennessee, Knoxville, July 28th, 1833. Until very recently, this piece has been on display at the museum and interpreted as having been made in Knoxville, and obviously with very good reason. But I think there may be archival, material, and provenance evidence to suggest otherwise. First, the secretary desk uses white pine as a secondary wood, something that would be unusual for Tennessee, but very expected in the Mid-Atlantic or even the Northeast. Additionally, archival evidence and other signed surviving pieces of furniture suggest that Rose had already returned to Pennsylvania by the time that he signed and dated this desk. One of those surviving pieces, a tall case clock, adds evidence to this theory. The clock has the same telltale carved urn motif that we have seen in other examples, and it's signed. Inscribed also with New Bloomfield, Perry County, Pennsylvania, and the date, March 12th, 1833. You'll recall that this date is 4 months before the dated signature on the secretary desk in our collection, and after the date that Rose was known to have left East Tennessee, which would mean that to have made the State Museum secretary desk in Knoxville, Rose would have had just that 4-month window to travel back south, create his masterpiece of cabinet making, and then return back to Pennsylvania. Instead, I think that we're left to conclude that, as he had done on the earlier bureau, where he included Philadelphia in his signature, despite working in Knoxville, Rose referenced East Tennessee on this desk to indicate where the maker was from, not where he was currently working. So, why does any of this matter? Well, we can understand why Rose may have wanted to advertise to his East Tennessee customers that he was from Philadelphia, But why Rose would want to document his time in Tennessee for his Pennsylvania customers is a little less clear. One theory may be found in the faux bookends that Rose included on the interior of this desk. One of the books is a sort of clever maker's signature because it is stamped with John Rose's name. The other is presenting as a book called The Life of General Andrew Jackson. This desk is, of course, made less than a year after Jackson's successful re-election campaign at the height of his celebrity. If this desk was commissioned for a particular customer, then given this faux bookend detail, that customer was likely a Jackson supporter, and they may have appreciated the cabinet maker's connection to the president's home state. Rose's geographically specific signatures may have also meant something to him personally as the cabinet maker. After all, most cabinet makers did not sign their pieces, and Rose's consistent use of large, legible, and detailed signatures may suggest an artist's close connection with his creation. Over the course of his life, Rose moved back and forth between 3 states, likely driven by both personal and business motivations. Perhaps these signatures were more for him than they were for his customers, documenting the way Rose had been influenced by the places that he'd been as much as by the market where he was currently working. So, keeping in mind this theme of movement has been critical to a very much ongoing investigation of another very exciting new acquisition to the State Museum's permanent collection. And that is this remarkable inlaid cherry desk and bookcase. This piece came to us about a year ago with a truly exceptional provenance. The desk's first owner was a man named Robert Orr. Robert Orr was born in Maryland around 1770, but soon after moved to Rutherford County, North Carolina, where he grew up, married, and where the first of his 8 children were born. By 1800, Robert and his family moved from North Carolina to Williamson County, Tennessee. And by 1807, down into Marshall County, where members of the Orr family still live today. When Robert Orr died in 1855, his will identified a desk, bookcase, and a clock, which he intended to pass down through the family as, quote, relics. Both pieces are today in the collection of the Tennessee State Museum, very excitingly. The desk was purchased from his estate by his son, Robert Jackson Orr, in 1855 for a very high price of $25, and then passed down to the next generation of Robert Jackson Orrs to the present donor who gifted the piece to the museum. We're very grateful to the family of Robert Jackson Orr, who made this donation possible. I'll confess from the beginning here that this desk and bookcase is to some extent still a mystery. And while I certainly understand why many folks would wait to share something like this until all is resolved, I wanted to walk through with you all today some of the types of questions we are asking of this remarkable new acquisition, even before we have all the answers, to demonstrate not just the why, but the how of learning from Tennessee furniture. So one of the most intriguing aspects of this piece, obviously, is its striking asymmetrical inlay. Inlay is a technique in which the craftsperson sets very thin strips or flat shapes of wood into the surface of the primary wood to create ornamental designs. These geometrical examples were executed with the use of a compass, creating the tree-like forms on the top panels of the upper case, the circular and angular shapes of the bottom panels of the upper case, and the asymmetrical double circles and compass shapes on the fall front of the lower desk. So we see this type of inlay application most commonly in Kentucky. Several hyper-regional Kentucky furniture schools have been identified, and here I'll give credit to scholar Mac Cox for his work on these groups, where extensive inlay and some of these same compass-driven geometric shapes, as well as similar ogee bracket feet used on the Orr desk and bookcase, appear. We do see inlay used in early Tennessee furniture, especially in Washington and Greene counties in the eastern portion of the state, but not quite with this same look and feel, and not much at all in the southern portions of Middle Tennessee. So this is where having that solid provenance on this ore desk and bookcase is so important. Because I think that if we had encountered this piece, which you can see here on the right, separated from its family history, perhaps in an antique store at an auction somewhere, we could have concluded that it was probably made in Kentucky. But instead, we have the basis for a really interesting research question, which is how did Robert Orr, who to our knowledge never lived in Kentucky, end up with a desk and bookcase, which he highly valued both monetarily and personally, in his Marshall County, Tennessee home? We know stylistically that this desk was likely made around 1800 or in the first 10 or 15 years of the 19th century. So let's consider where Robert Orr was during this time frame. As we know, Robert Orr arrived in Tennessee and was paying taxes in Williamson County by 1800. He could have made the trek from southern North Carolina to Middle Tennessee by several pathways during this time frame, likely arriving first in Nashville, then moving south into Williamson County. Whether he came through the Cumberland Gap and down the river or made use of some of the new trails popping up to the south, the journey would not have been easy. And it's unlikely that he made that trip with his wife, 4 young children, and a nearly 8-foot tall solid cherry bookcase in tow. So we can likely rule out the possibility that this piece was made in North Carolina and brought into Tennessee. One of the viable pathways into Middle Tennessee at this time did come through Kentucky via the Cumberland Gap, where the family may have come into contact with the inlay tradition that we discussed just a moment ago. But again, it would ultimately make more sense for Robert Orr to have pursued fine furnishings for the new life he envisioned once he got to where he was going and brought that Middle Tennessee home into reality. So we're left with another possibility that in Middle Tennessee, whether in Williamson or Marshall County, Robert Orr purchased this desk and bookcase from a local cabinet maker who had perhaps apprenticed in or had some level of exposure to Kentucky, where he picked up some of the style and technique that he used here. In the interest of time today, I won't walk through all of the possible candidates that are targets for our ongoing research. But I do think one interesting aspect of this story is that despite many shared characteristics with Kentucky furniture, the maker of this desk and bookcase seems to have made these styles his own. You'll notice from our review, a quick overview of some Kentucky examples, there is to date no obvious match to the Orr desk and bookcase that would definitively connect this piece to a particular maker, school, or place. And this is exactly how furniture styles are transmitted. As people move, as they very often did in early Tennessee, their ideas move with them. And when those ways of making furniture arrive here from outside the state, they eventually transform into something else, responding to the realities of a new customer base, new sources for materials, and the maker's own evolution as a craftsperson. As we've seen with John Earhart Rose as well, early Tennessee clocks, and now the Orr family desk and bookcase, Tennessee furniture is a story of movement, not stasis. And as people come into and out of Tennessee through the state's history, they bring the unique combination of their training, experiences, and personal creativity to contribute to Tennessee's material culture. So if we return to our major sections of the Tennessee Furniture Exhibition, we've looked now at how furniture was used, how and where furniture was made, and then we have a fourth major section that we've titled Furniture as Art. I think you've probably seen from some of the pieces highlighted this evening that while we can tell these important historical stories with furniture, there is also important room for appreciating these pieces for their beauty and considering how the aesthetic choices made by furniture makers and users brings to light human histories as well. This is true from the early 19th century, the earliest end of our collection, through to the present. One of the best parts of the story of Tennessee furniture, and one that I personally have enjoyed, is that Tennessee's rich heritage of furniture production is very much ongoing. And today, some of the leading craft furniture makers in the world work here in Tennessee. Among these is Craig Nutt, whose vegetable-inspired creations, like this okra table and onion blossom table, both on display in the exhibit, have delighted for decades. Nutt's veg tables often include playful reinterpretations of historic forms inspired by the craftsperson's own fruitful vegetable garden. With the okra table, you can see how Nutt has reimagined the elaborately carved tea tables with tripod legs of the 18th century in his own vegetable vernacular, using full okra pods for the legs, where the vegetable's natural shape supports that form, and a sliced pod as the tabletop, where the 8-point star shape of the okra slice again mirrors the scalloped or ruffled edges of classical table designs. On the onion table, pad feet become unopened onion blossoms, and cabriole legs are reinterpreted as gracefully curving onion stalks. Historic furniture examples, of course, can also be appreciated as art, and considering the artistry of historic and contemporary cabinet makers and craftspeople in general is one way of accessing the stories of people and place that are tied to these objects. Perhaps one of the best examples of this in our collection is this dresser by Black craftsperson Louis Buckner. This is another fan favorite for those of you who visited the museum. May have seen this on display previously as well. Buckner was born around 1856 and was enslaved at birth in Jefferson County. After emancipation, he learned his trade in Sevier County through an apprenticeship with a white cabinet maker named Christian Stump, a Union Army veteran who had moved into East Tennessee from Michigan following the war. Louis Buckner appears throughout archival records in the second half of the 19th century, including in the 1880 census, where he is listed as a self-employed cabinet maker. And we're fortunate that communities in East Tennessee have ensured that examples of Louis Buckner's craftsmanship survive. These include both architectural examples and furniture. As both Annabeth Dooley, Tiffany Moman, and other scholars have shown, Buckner and other Black craftspeople in his network, like brick mason Isaac Dockery, literally built their community of freed people in the decades following emancipation, using their skills to create spaces for their community to thrive, including the New Salem Baptist Church, which is shown here. Going back to the dresser, Louis Buckner also completed work for white customers, as is the case with this remarkable bedroom suite executed for William and Rebecca Henderson of Sevierville around 1889. 2 pieces from this suite survive in our collection, fortunately rescued from a house fire in the 1930s. We have a bed and this dresser. Part of being a successful craftsperson, which Louis Buckner certainly was, is being a good business person. And here I think you can see Buckner's business skills in the way that he is speaking the visual language of the aesthetic movement here with this East Lake inspired design. In creating furniture for the Henderson family, Buckner was providing a locally produced alternative to suites similar in form and style that were being offered by manufacturers in major centers to the Northeast, like this example shown from a catalog from Williamsport, Pennsylvania. But if we look closely, this is where Buckner's artistry comes into play. Comparing this dresser to the hundreds of similar East Lake era forms that survive in homes and collections today, you won't find any that look exactly like this one. And that is because this one was made by Louis Buckner. Buckner likely had access to pattern books and had seen examples of other works to know the styles that his customers would be seeking. Playing on the fashionable ornament of the day made Buckner's work marketable and proves his skills as an entrepreneur. But the unique arrangement of these elements, the combination of hand-carved motifs, and the vision to bring these shapes and details together makes this a work of art. We have more to learn from the individual motifs that appear in Buckner's work. Some scholars have theorized that the fruit or vegetable symbol that appears in the crest of this dresser is a type of eggplant with African roots grown and eaten frequently in Black communities in the southern United States. To date, it appears that Buckner's inclusion of this motif was his own, as no matching examples of this carving have been identified. And whether or not this carving should be interpreted as an African eggplant, it does indicate the personal choices and individual artistic expression that shaped this Black craftsperson's work, which is, of course, especially meaningful in light of the Jim Crow South context where Buckner lived and worked. Had this dresser been lost in that house fire and had other examples of his furniture and architectural creations been destroyed, we would have still known that Louis Buckner was a cabinet maker and a carpenter, and we could have still pieced together elements of his remarkable biography. But I encourage you, if you do have a chance to visit the State Museum and to visit the furniture exhibition, to find this dresser. And I think you'll see where appreciation for the work of the hands and the minds of the artistry of furniture makers and any Tennessee craftsperson can tell us more about their lives than the written accounts alone ever could. So I mentioned again at the beginning of this talk that the process of creating Tennessee furniture as an exhibition was an institutionally self-reflective one that allowed us to analyze both strengths and weaknesses. And as with any collection, we still have opportunities to identify pieces to better represent the full story of Tennessee furniture, both today and in the past, as well as to tell new stories with the pieces already stewarded in the State Museum's collection. One of those opportunities is to bring new light to the many hands involved in furniture production. In the earliest decades of our state's history, that of course includes the contributions of craftspeople who were enslaved. This chair came to us with the donor's oral history that it had been made by a person enslaved at, quote, Gibson Place, which was identified as being in Rutherford County and near Murfreesboro. With research, we were able to identify a possible candidate for the maker of this chair. While a home or plantation with the exact name Gibson Place specifically has not yet been identified, there were several Gibson families in the stated vicinity in the 1850 and 1850 censuses, with a few of those Gibsons appearing in the census slave schedules of those years. Of those Gibsons, one, a woman named Sarah Ann Gibson, enslaved a man whose names the census takers did not record, but who was documented as being 22 years old in 1860. Newspaper accounts, surviving manuscript records, and other sources remind us that enslaved craftspeople are included among Tennessee's furniture makers. This so-called newspaper runaway ad from 1813 identifies a man called Jack, or perhaps better known as Isaac, who was enslaved in Sumner County, and here, according to this source, was a skilled turner, wheelwright, chair maker, and general woodworker. I don't know this craftsperson's fate, and to our knowledge, no creations from his hand survive. However, his story and countless stories like it inform our study of Tennessee furniture that does survive. Even when we may never be able to match a piece of furniture to these craftspersons' names, their stories prompt us to ask better questions of the pieces that we do steward in our collection, and to consider the ways in which the history of slavery is a part of early Tennessee furniture, not just in the wealth that enabled finely furnished homes, but in the skills, artistry, and humanity of enslaved people who often created furniture themselves in various contexts, whether on a plantation or working in a cabinet making shop. If you visit the gallery at the State Museum, You'll hopefully notice some of these stories and themes throughout, as many of these types of questions shaped the development of the exhibition. But you also may notice that, with the important exception of one very innovative desk by famed furniture maker Wendy Maruyama while she was completing a residency at the Aramont School of Arts and Crafts, all of the pieces displayed were, to the best of our knowledge, made by men. Of course, in the 19th century, cabinet making was a male trade, but that doesn't mean that women's stories are not told through Tennessee furniture. In furniture production, women worked in upholstery, operated retail establishments, and may have performed a myriad of unrecorded and likely unpaid tasks that were essential to the operations of a cabinet maker's shop and business. Today, although there's still much progress to be made in inviting women into the world of woodworking and furniture making, women are making important contributions to the field. Just one example, Kimberly Winkle, professor and director of the School of Art, Craft, and Design at Tennessee Tech, was featured in Tennessee Crafts' 2021 biennial exhibition held at the State Museum, and she teaches widely, considered a leader in the field. So this evening, I'd like to close with the way that our exhibition actually begins, and that is with 2 chairs. One of the most common questions that may come to a museum visitor's mind when they see a piece of furniture in a gallery is, who sat here? The assumption being that if a chair is given a place of prominence in a history museum, it's likely because it was associated with a famous person or event. And this is certainly the case with some pieces in our collection, including these 2 chairs. This first chair once belonged to early Tennessee statesman John Ray. With its writing surface, it likely facilitated Ray's correspondence and publications as he advocated for higher education in Tennessee and war with Britain in 1812, as well as the removal of indigenous peoples from their lands. A century and a half later, we have this second chair, a so-called Calytron stool, which was used by the mostly women employees of the Y-12 uranium enrichment plant at Oak Ridge during World War II. In both instances, the chairs could have been considered, in the old sense of the collecting term, relics, objects that connect us to the past because they were there as witnesses to pivotal moments when Tennessee history shaped the nation and the world. But if we look closer, we can see that there's more we can learn from these objects. John Ray's writing chair is made with shaved post and rung construction and has pinned joints. Since this did not require a lathe, it's the type of construction that we'd expect to see in the very earliest days of the state, perhaps even predating Tennessee statehood. John Ray may have purchased this chair when he first arrived in Tennessee, giving us a picture of the place he inhabited while helping to shape the early state and nation. And for the Calytron stool, its straight back and lack of armrests in light of the long shifts women described working at Y-12 gives us insight into what it felt like to be at Oak Ridge. Where on the circular footrest preserves this physical experience, where women pushed their heels into the wood, reaching for switches on the Calytron boards. The chair's design, too, tells us something about how Oak Ridge sought to position itself. Even though the project was, of course, not seen to the public while their work was unfolding, photos by Ed Westcott from inside Oak Ridge were included with a press release in the immediate aftermath of the dropping of the atomic bomb. In this famous image of employees at the Calytron boards posing conspicuously on their stools, the stool's modernist design certainly seems appropriate furnishing for a facility ushering in the atomic age. These chairs demonstrate for us the promises and opportunities of Tennessee furniture. Tennessee furniture includes pieces constructed from native woods and imported materials, shipped into the state from factories elsewhere or made here in local shops, and pieces crafted by lifelong residents and journeymen just passing through. More than silent witnesses of Tennessee's past, furniture shaped history. in much the same way that it shapes our present. I, of course, am not able to see you all in this webinar format, but even now, consider the ways that your experience of this talk have been shaped by furniture. I don't know where you all are sitting or how you've chosen to engage in this webinar, but perhaps the furniture that you are currently engaging with is dictating how you have come to engage with this presentation. Maybe it's starting to become uncomfortable, telling you that it's time to wrap it up. Certainly, there are ways that furniture now is supporting and dictating my own body language in the own way that I am able to communicate in this format. So I know that it's a silly premise, but I hope that it jogs your imagination to consider the ways, noticed or not, that furniture shapes our daily lives. And it certainly shaped the lives of Tennesseans in the past. Thank you.